What's up everyone, I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. And in this video, it's about to get wild. It's all about encounters had by people while in scout troops. So if that sounds like something that interests you, definitely pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So I won't say exactly where this happened, but that's because that I don't want people to go there and possibly get hurt or worse. So it's 2017. A group of scouts, including me, aged 15 to 17, decide to go on a camping trip to the park. And this state park or wildlife reserve, whatever it is in my city as well. So we all plan on following a path, and we set up camp just a few hundred meters from this path. Eventually, we decide to go off the path and search for a big clearing, and we find one where we would set up camp. We make a fire, we eat food, and some people snuck alcohol, so we had a good time with that. But at around midnight, we heard something move. We all looked around, but we saw nothing, and we didn't want to get up and go searching for it because we were still a little drunk. We figured that it was an animal. Although the rest of the night, all of us heard movement around the camp. It sounded like more than one thing. We fall asleep all around 3 o'clock in the morning, and the next morning we wake up. We find a dead, disemboweled pig with unknown iconography engraved on it, belly down on a huge rock. Naturally, the cops are called, and they search the area. The cops find that this clearing has 12 huge boulders spaced in a perfect circle around the camp, one large flat in the middle. All the grass is laying down in this clearing. When one of the teens got home, he found a note in his backpack. The note read, "Sleep well, but don't ever come back." There's always been these theories or stories about occult worshippers that were very active in the area, and the clearing was some sort of shrine. Now how they constructed this shrine, or how they had their ritual performed without the campers noticing, is completely unknown to all of us. So I've been reading about dead zones that you find in the forest, and I've never lost anyone to them before, but I have gotten close to becoming a missing person. Here's my closest encounter with the dead zone. I'm an avid hiker. I'm also an Order of the Arrow member and Eagle Scout, who's done a lifetime's worth of 40-mile hikes all around my local wildlife. I know the plants well enough to freak some people out and eat a wild bud, berry, or mushroom when I find them. I decide that trail hiking is for tourists, and I start following some animal trails. I was deep in the woods on a ridgeline after a 6-mile steep incline hike, which was mostly bouldering. I had the best sunset, I ate some nuts, and I started heading down. The bottom is a deep forest. About halfway back to my car, I start to feel this deep sense of unease. There's no wind, no birds calling, nothing. I could flip a stone over and I would hear it echo at least 3 times. And then suddenly, I see something that I have yet to ever see since. Wisps glowing in the dark. Mind you, not fireflies. They weren't in season. They were stationary lights about the size of your thumb, close to the ground. I tried to bend down to see if they were glowing plants like jack-o'-lantern mushrooms, but they all vanished when I got close. I ran over and tried to cup one in my hand, assuming that it was an insect of some sort, but felt nothing. Then hypoxia kicked in. Headaches, drowsiness, blurred vision, and the immediate urge to get the hell out of there. I felt like that I should sleep immediately, to which I assumed that I was possibly having an allergic reaction or some kind of heart condition, so I start sprinting to my car. I collapse as soon as I get inside, but I feel some sense of safety after locking the doors. I wake up 4 hours later to a sheriff knocking on my window, telling me that I can't sleep there overnight. I'm convinced that if I didn't make it to my car, I may have become a 411 case. So this is something that happened way back when I was in Boy Scouts. We were on a trip about 100 miles west of Philmont in New Mexico. This is also near Navajo Lake State Park. So we're camping all together on the edge of this field. Because it was flat, it had some trees that we could set up hammocks though. So it was a pretty rowdy night. We stayed up doing stuff, telling stories, and just having a good time. But at 2 a.m., I wake up in my hammock. I see a younger scout looking out over the hilly plains near our campsite. I call his name, and he says, "Man, shut up, look at that." He points out over the field. There's a massive, wolf-like dog looking at our camp. It stands there for what feels like 10 minutes, but I think it was more like 30 seconds. The thing then rears up on its hind legs and runs off on the other side of the hill away from view. I'm halfway out of my hammock because I'm looking. I whispered, "Did you see that?" The kid replied, "Yeah," in a hushed tone. And then another kid, who was apparently awake during the whole ordeal, said, "It's just scouting us out. Ignore it, and it won't come back." We only got back to sleep when dawn was breaking. Nothing else of note happened at all for the rest of the weekend. None of the three of us ever really told anybody. We didn't want to get made fun of. One time, went out camping really deep in the woods. It was the Rocky Mountains area, a 5-day trip. It was me and one other guy, a good friend of mine. We get to the location, and it's a super comfy spot. There's plenty of tree cover around, so the site felt pretty private, and we knew there weren't any other hikers around us for around 2 miles probably. It was my first time in that area. My friend, though, had gone several times before, by himself. We went a little farther into the woods than either of us normally would have, but it was fun to see the less used parts of the trail. We both enjoyed being at peace in nature. The first day in camp passes with no issues. We enjoy some freeze-dried meals and energy bars. We hike around the off-trails areas by our site a little bit. So some info about myself. I'm an experienced camper and backpacker, as well as an Eagle Scout. I'm in pretty good shape. I work out 4 to 5 days a week, and I rock climb. Because of this, we decided the next day that we would try to go up almost a sheer rock wall, maybe half a mile from our site, and see what was on top. As I was in the best shape, I would go up first and find the best route. The night passes fine, and we set out with light packs, water, bars, and some emergency items to try and scale this wall. I start heading up, and it's not too bad. It's more like a hike climb than actual climbing, but still I get a good sweat going. I get to the top, and my friend calls out to me that he started to climb, following my route. As I wait for him, I look around the clearing that I've just climbed into. It was very pretty, but some things seemed kinda off, just a feeling, you know, almost like somebody was staring at you while you're not looking at them. I check again how far up my friend is. He's about halfway up. I walk around a little and look at what's in the clearing. In the middle, there's this large boulder. It seems to have rolled down the mountainside. There's a flattened patch of grass and broken trees behind it. It was probably 12 feet tall and very smooth, almost as if it had been smoothed by someone. I should mention too that my friend and I were sleeping in separate tents, and he usually got up before me in the mornings, so I usually wouldn't see him coming out of his tent. I'm wondering about it, and looking back at the path, it seems to have rolled down, and then I get that feeling again. The hair on the back of my neck stands up. I'm starting to get a little bit nervous for some reason, as all this seems really strange. Not creepy, but just weird. I don't understand this. I head back over to see if my friend is almost up, but then I don't hear him making noise anymore. He was grunting and struggling enough that I could hear it, but it suddenly all stopped. And then I noticed that all the other sounds around me had stopped as well. There was no wind or birds, just completely silent. I rush over to the ledge, and my friend is gone. There's no trace of him. If he'd fallen, I would have heard him yell, and I'd be able to see him lying at the bottom, but he wasn't there. I'm thoroughly freaked out at this point, though. I start to climb down. I have to find him and figure out what's happening. And then I begin to hear laughter behind me. Not right behind me, kind of faint, kind of far off. It seemed to be coming from the forest behind me, and that was it. I wasn't waiting to get killed by whatever paranormal thing was living up there. I was getting out, and I start rushing down the cliff as fast as I can go. I hear noises above me, like heavy rocks rolling down slowly, and I realize that something is pushing that boulder down the hill. I'm freaking out, going as fast as I can, and I manage to get down and start sprinting to the campsite. I hear the same laugh behind me, but then it stops. It's like it was cut off, and everything is silent again for maybe 30 seconds, and then suddenly, just like someone was turning on a volume knob, all the normal forest noises resume. A gentle breeze, birds, and here's where it gets extremely weird. I get back to the campsite a little after that. My friend is sitting there, cooking himself lunch, and asking where I went. I didn't tell him any of the weird stuff I saw yet, but he noticed that I was visibly distressed. I told him that we both went to climb the cliff, and that he had completely disappeared while he was scaling the side. He laughed and told me that he hadn't left camp all morning, and that I had gone since before he got up, and he was actually wondering where I was and what I was doing. He said that he could vaguely hear me talking to somebody, but there was never any replies. It's almost like I was having a conversation by myself. And after that, I convinced him somehow that there was something urgent that I had to return home to do, and then we had to cut the trip short. He finally agreed that we could leave after some pleading. We packed up and left, and I haven't gone camping without being in a large group since then. I don't know what happened. It freaked the hell out of me, and I'm still scared of that feeling. I'm sorry that I don't have all the details together, but this is what happened, and I don't know any better than this. A little backstory before I get into the meat of this is that I currently still reside about 3 hours away from where this incident happened, but I haven't seen anything since the incident, but I still get the shakes and the spooks whenever I go around the area. So, it was the summer of 2016. I'm not really a typical Boy Scout. I like to think that I don't look like a turbo virgin and that I've got a better chance at getting laid than most guys in that organization. I'm 6'3", not really a huge muscle man, but I'm not skinny either. I'm a pretty good shot, but mostly when it comes to tracking and shooting a moving target with shotguns. So I go to summer camp with my scout troop, like any other normal Boy Scout would. It was a week of doing outdoor activities and earning badges and stuff, the usual. Around this time too, I used to read a lot of scary stories on the internet, and I used to listen to a lot of YouTube videos. I really enjoyed being spooked and hearing about all the stuff that supposedly was out there. I guess I just didn't ever think that I'd have my own type of story like this. So the camp that we went to isn't the greatest, but the scenery is gorgeous. I camp in the nearest campsite to the gun range, a plus for me, since I often find myself just going there to waste time shooting. Everything is normal and peaceful for the first couple days, really restful and peaceful nights. All of that would take a complete turnaround soon after. On the third of our 6-night adventure, me and 3 other guys decide that we want to go on a late-night hike. I was the only smart one and brought my flashlight. The other guys thought that we'd have enough sunlight, even though we were leaving at like 7:40 and sunset was at 8. We set out and explore some of the trails that the camp has. We stay off the main trails because who the hell wants to go on those, right? So the sun starts to go down, and 2 other bros my age, we'll call them Jack and Dan. Jack is a 5'11" beanpole, absolutely no fat or muscle on this kid whatsoever. I'm pretty sure that he's scared of carbs, but he's very skillful at making shelters and fires. Dan is a little guy, 5'3", yet he's deadly at close quarters. This guy can take me to the ground in just a few seconds. I wouldn't want to be on his bad side. He knows how to take people down. But back to the story at hand. We aren't really scared because we've done stupider stuff together. I just turn my light on and we continue walking down the path. And then as we're walking, we realize just how big of a campsite this is. And we're thinking, how long have we been walking? And then we realize again that none of us recognize anything. This trail is supposed to be a circle and leads around the camp in a circle. We think that we must have took a wrong turn or somehow get onto another trail in the dark. We figure that we aren't going to make it back to camp with it being this dark. I look at my watch and realize it's 11 p.m. and think, we were walking for almost 4 hours? This isn't right at all. I start feeling anxious. Something is very off. Jack and Dan feel it too. We figure that we need to find a place just to lay low for the night. Jack gets to work building a fire so my flashlight doesn't die. Meanwhile, Dan and I look for branches to make a shelter. None of us leave each other's sight. Jack gets the fire going pretty quickly, and we all feel a little more relieved after this. We finish the shelter and decide that we really should try to get some sleep. But right before we get into the shelter, everything goes quiet. It's like someone hit the mute button. There was no crickets, or frogs, or the fire even. We all know that this isn't good. The hair on our necks stands upright. Everything that happened next happened so quick, it's hard to describe, so bear with me. The first thing that hit was this weird stench. It was like the smell of whenever you smell a skunk that's been hit by a car. Jack gagged and almost threw up on the spot. Dan was on alert, and so was I. But the next thing I knew, something got thrown onto the fire, smothering it out almost instantly. I say almost because whatever was thrown on it, we found out later that it was a deer. We think it was still alive because of the way the skeleton was laid out on the ground. Eventually it burst into flames. Everything around us was lit up extremely bright, nearly blinding us. I managed to see through it all, and I managed to see whatever had done this. This thing was tall. Not so tall that I couldn't touch the top of its head with my hands easily, but getting close to that thing was not on my to-do list. Dan and I both grabbed wood out of the fire and threw it at the thing. It almost looked like it had the head of a deer, but was built like a truck and stood on hind legs, like a human, and it had these weird contorted things for fingers. Like when you break your finger and it doesn't heal properly and it kind of looks a little mangled, just like that. And thank God Jack wasn't out there alone. Anyway, my log hit the thing on the burning side, catching its shoulder, which was covered in fur. It caught it on fire. This thing had an ungodly roar erupting from it. Obviously, we didn't hurt it, we just pissed it off. Instead of attacking us right there, it ran. After about 5 minutes, the sounds of the night returned, and the smell slowly drifted away. Dan and I weren't going to sleep after that, so we let Jack get some sleep, because he definitely needed it. The morning took forever to come. It felt like it was the longest night of my life, but when it did, we booked it back the way we came, judging as best we could with what little daylight we had. We found our tracks and footprints and started following them back to camp. We got back to the main trails, and the camp was in a total uproar. 3 kids going missing for a whole night isn't really good for the camp, and everyone was searching for us. We were in pretty deep shit once we got back, but hell, we were just glad to be back. That night, nothing happened of importance, so we finally got a good night's rest. The next night, the 5th out of the 6th one, was the last night that we'd be staying out there. We asked the counselor and director of the camp if anyone had reported seeing a giant deer walking on its hind legs before, but they thought that we were just pulling a prank and trying to scare people after going missing for the night. We went back to our trail of footprints that hadn't vanished because that week was drier than the Sahara Desert. We were looking down, but we realized very quickly that there was a 4th set of tracks following ours. That thing had followed us all the way back to our camp. We got really freaked the hell out and booked it back to our campsite, where we found a mutilated rabbit corpse in the fire pit. Jack said, "Shit, dude, what are we gonna do?" or something to that effect. I just remember said, "We're gonna survive, dude." I tried to sound badass and like I wasn't scared, but it came out as a stuttering, blubbering mess. We went to the mess hall and asked for the leftover cans of beans from the night before. We said they were for a project, and they happily obliged. We got some alert traps made up to put around the camp, and we dug pits and put some bits of metal in the bottom to try and make like a makeshift spike pit. My scoutmaster was of Native American descent. I don't really know what kind of tribe or anything, it just never came up. He said that if we really found a skinwalker, then it wanted us and no one else. And so he didn't endanger the other guys. He took them all and had a troop X-troop camp out across the camp. The campsite that we were in was the farthest into the woods, so we were secluded anyways. He gave us a radio and said that if that thing came for us, to radio him, and he'd come get us, along with another adult, and we'd get out of there. Both Jack and Dan were nervous, as was I. We ought to be. We went into the troop trailer, and I handed Jack the 44. Our scoutmaster keeps it there for protective reasons. Dan could never aim for shit, so trusting him with a gun was like sticking your hand into a crocodile's mouth. And then I made the smartest choice in my entire life. We ran over to the gun range, which was closed, right next to our campsite. We ended up having to break into the storeroom where they kept all of the guns. The 12 gauge that was in a case was left unlocked, so I grabbed that, and I grabbed 2 boxes of shells. If you couldn't tell, we were expecting the worst. We went back to camp and told Dan to get into the tree farthest from the side of the woods that thing was likely to come from. Dan had eagle vision at night, and it was safer for him up there. We got a fire going and waited. Nothing happened until about 4 hours after nightfall, just like the other night. None of us were able to sleep. We were just there, waiting. And then that skunky smell hit us first. We perked up and knew that we were about to see it. This time, something was thrown again, but not at the fire. It went over the fire and right into the tree where Dan was. It hit him, and he came tumbling out of the tree, about 13 feet. We heard a snap and a groan, and we knew that he needed help. Jack immediately radioed the scoutmaster, but before he could finish, he heard the roar again, and yet another animal was chucked at Jack. It hit the radio, and when the radio hit the ground, it broke. And I thought, well, shit, now we're on our own. I couldn't see much as the fire hadn't been stalked in at least half an hour. Since it was a Boy Scout gun, there was no flashlight under the barrel. It was just a no-nonsense wooden stock gun. I yelled at Jack to go get in front of Dan, to protect him as best he could. I heard him yell something, but I didn't quite hear it. But it wasn't coming from his direction. It came from the direction of the flying animals, the woods. And then we heard, just like this, right? And then Jack screamed, "I swear to F that isn't me. What the hell?" And then this ungodly laugh that sent chills from my head to my toes. I just yelled at Jack one more time to get in front of Dan. He did, and now I was on the front lines. I just looked around, but I couldn't see anything. Everything was so quiet. I swear I could hear my own blood pumping. Then I saw them, those God-forsaken eyes, those yellow, eerie, glowing eyes that will haunt me forever. It came out of the far end of camp and walked right up next to the fire. It just said, "We're going to survive," almost in my tone. I was frozen in fear. The shotgun just dangling in my arms. I was useless. Jack shot around, and it was so close to my head that I heard the hum of a bullet. It hit the thing in the shoulder. I could tell by the splatter. I saw something come out of it, through the light of the fire. It didn't look fazed at all. It just grunted. That was enough to snap me out of it. I instantly realized what I had to do, and I aimed and loaded a shell into that thing. That was enough to send it back a bit. It was caught off guard. I loaded another round in and moved one step closer. My mistake. That thing got up seemingly fine and charged straight for me. This startled me beyond anything else in life. In a split second, I sidestepped just far enough that its charge missed me. It grazed my stomach with those claws and gave me a nasty cut that I had to get stitches for. It stopped and turned around, but at this point, I had so much adrenaline, I did the stupidest but most heroic thing I've ever done. I charged at it and jumped up and smacked the butt of the shotgun straight into its eye. It bent over a little bit, covered the eye, which was now covered with that weird ooze that I saw when it was shot. I was no more than 2 feet away from the thing, and I blasted a shot right into its leg. It went down into its knees, and that's when I ran. I threw the shotgun on the ground, and I picked up Dan, and we booked it as fast as we could. We ran into our scoutmaster on the way to where they were staying, and we got back to the campsite. He grabbed the other boys. We got to the parking lot and into our cars. I was 16, and I was the one that drove Jack and Dan to the camp, and we just left. We found a hotel that had cheap but decent rooms, and we stayed there for the night. We went back the next morning, and the camp, as you can imagine, was trashed. Many troops left soon after we did, because there was, quote, a giant bear terrorizing the campers, and, quote, large footprints were being found outside of tents. We had to go back to our campsite to collect all of our things, and what we found was a disaster. Our tents were ripped to shreds. Everyone's gear was thrown about and tattered and broken. The stench was on everything, and in the middle of the campsite, we found a puddle of that black shit, that ooze. That was the spot that I'd shot it in the leg the night before. It must have lost a lot of blood, or whatever that liquid is. We salvaged what we could and packed up the trailer, which was also covered in that weird ooze on the inside. All of our food was gone, and we found a deer head, ripped clean off its body, just facing the door to the trailer. We never did find that shotgun that I had stolen, though I did return the ammo, the remaining amount that I had. And as you can imagine, I got in more deep shit for that. But we also got out into the road, and our scoutmaster made us stop at a supermarket. He gave us all a whole garlic and told us to eat it all. People were coughing and gagging, but we all ended up swallowing it piece by piece. Then he told everyone they could get a drink to wash it down once we were all done. We went back to our hometown, and our scoutmaster explained to our parents that a bear had gotten into our campsite and most of our gear was torn apart. The parents bought every last second of it and left without question. He stopped me from taking Jack and Dan home and said to us calmly, "You boys are lucky, but we need to be sure. Did anyone ever leave the site of the others while you were out there alone?" And as far as we knew, nobody had gone anywhere. Nobody was acting strange, nobody was acting different. And he said, "All right, then go home. Don't answer the door to your house if you're home alone. And for God's sake, make sure that you don't venture into these woods alone at night." He then gave us a very stiff pat on the back. And after that, I just took the guys to my place because that's what we would usually do after summer camp. We stayed up that night, talking about everything, over and over again, but we just wanted it to be over. I took them home the next day, and life eventually went back to normal. Nothing unusual happened after that. We just kinda kept our eyes open and the usual stuff. I don't know what we found. I think it might have been a skinwalker, but they're not in Indiana. I don't know what the hell it was. We haven't seen or heard of any reports of anybody going missing or anything happening ever. We figured that it might have been a one-off and it might be over. And we didn't go back to that summer camp that year. Or do we ever plan on going back there ever again? I hope nobody takes the same path that we took. And thank you to Anonymous for sending that in. So, those were pretty wild, weren't they? If you have one of your own, I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also down there is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And there's super thanks here on YouTube. But of course, just watching the video, liking and subscribing is a great help too. And with that, I think I will keep you no longer, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.